Hey, what's going on, folks? All right, so today we're gonna break down the graded card sales data on eBay. There's some interesting stories unfolding as we look at some of the grading companies and the state of the market. You're gonna wanna see this. All right, hey, what's up? Okay, so about 2 months ago, I put out a video that looked at the past year's worth of data of eBay sales, and we looked at graded card companies, how they're doing, sell-through rates, average sell prices, all kinds of stats. And I showed you a bunch of graphs in about 20 minutes. And there were some interesting takeaways, I think. The feedback was really good. And I promised to do a follow-up to that video, which is what we're doing today. So we're about 2.5 months removed from that video. And we're gonna look at basically another 60 days of data to see if some of the things that maybe we thought were unfolding are actually unfolding. And I think you'll be surprised with a couple of these predictions that we all kind of assumed are coming true. The first thing I noticed is that we dropped another 3,000 sellers. We look at the number of combined sellers selling graded cards, and we dropped 3,000 more sellers, which is 4 months consecutive of declining sellers. We get it. People are leaving the market. Maybe they weren't interested. Maybe they were selling things at a loss and they just got frustrated. Kind of expected, but we're on our 4th month in a row of declines, and it's definitely interesting to me to see that continue falling. So another piece of data that stuck out to me was the number of unsold items. And I think that's important because unsold items kind of tell us how saturated the market is with cards, with graded cards. It tells us a little bit about fatigue in the market. And we had the highest in 4 months of unsold cards, and we had the second highest in a year and a half. So we're kind of starting to see the saturation that we expected pop up in this category of unsold items. So cards that were listed but didn't sell. Another way of looking at the unsold data is coming up with a turnover rate. And a turnover rate is basically how long would it take for you to turn over that inventory. A lot of retail businesses use that. So if we were to take the number of unsold items divided by the number of transactions that month, you can come up with a turnover rate. Now, again, it's not perfect by any means, but it, again, gives us a ballpark number of kind of where we stand. The turnover rate in the month of March was the 3rd highest in 2 years. Higher the turnover, the worse it is, because you just have more inventory out there. So again, all these things that we kind of expected are playing out in the data. So just a few observations from the overall data. Let's dig into what I noticed from specific grading companies that was pretty unique. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed with grading card companies, and probably the biggest takeaway of all this, is I think Hybrid Grading Company is just about toast. I don't think they're gonna be able to recover from some of the data that we're seeing coming out. When I look at the month of March, I mean, they're basically scraping the bottom of the barrel with all their stats. They had their lowest revenue, total revenue, since June 2021, which is just a few months after they started, basically. They had their lowest average sell price since they began. They had their lowest sell-through rate since they began, and they had the most decline in number of sellers selling their slabs. So you kind of factor all that together, and I get there's a lot going on with HGA right now. The market is basically telling us that they're pushing them out and saying, hey, look, we're accepting somebody else as the number 4, which is CSG, and Hybrid Grading Company can go take a hike. That's my read into the data. Now, CSG actually has done a pretty good job in taking the place of Hybrid Grading Company as the 4th most prominent grading company in the marketplace. They've done very well across the board in their statistics in their first month with over 20,000 transactions, which is almost 3x the number of Hybrid Grading Company already. So there is one major negative against CSG, and that is their average sell price is just so stinking low. I think it's hovering around $35 right now, which tells me that yes, they're picking up volume from grading cards and people are interested in it, but the market hasn't bought into them being somebody that can grade higher end cards. They're not willing to pay a premium for a CSG slab. Now, there's some ways around that. Hopefully CSG figures out a way to get some higher end cards so that they can bring that average up. But for the most part, is probably not going to change anytime soon. It just is what it is. When you got the 4th tier grading company, you're not going to get a lot of the super high-end cards, which would, effectively bring up that price. So it is what it is, but CSG has definitely replaced Hybrid Grading Company as the 4th most prominent grading company in the market. So the second thing that I noticed when I looked at the grading companies is that the SGC versus BGS battle for number 2 is heating up even more than we thought. I predicted that we would start to see over the next 6 months SGC overtaking BGS in a lot of different categories, if not all categories. And it's starting to play out like that. SGC had another good 60 days. So a couple things to take note of in terms of the number of transactions. When we look at the percentage of market share with volume, BGS dropped 0.5%, so a half of 1% in terms of transactional market share. SGC over the last 60 days gained almost a half of 1%, 0.45%. So BGS dropped 0.5%, SGC gained 0.5%, so there's another 1% that collapsed in terms of where SGC and BGS are. In terms of the number of sellers selling slabs, BGS lost another 850 sellers over the last 60 days. SGC gained 320 sellers. So SGC kind of gained on that front in terms of just the number of different sellers selling their slabs. In terms of sell-through rate, the current March sell-through rate for BGS was 11.47%, which is the lowest of any grading company, which is not good, by the way. You want a higher sell-through percentage, which means only 89% of the BGS cards listed were selling. The SGC sell-through rate was 17.5%, so about 6 percentage points higher than BGS on the sell-through rate. And then finally, something that kind of tilted towards BGS's side was the number of unsold cards for the 60-day period. BGS actually dropped 1,200, so they had 1,200 less cards unsold on the market. SGC had another 7,400 added cards in their unsold categories. So when you look at the battle between SGC and BGS, you realize that SGC really is on this path to unseat BGS in a lot of categories as a clear number 2 in the marketplace. The marketplace is telling us that in terms of volume, in terms of sell-through rate, in terms of number of different sellers, that SGC is going to be number 2. Now, BGS has a lot of things going for it. They have a pretty good average sell price. In fact, they have the best average sell price. A lot of really high-end cards are in BGS slabs. In fact, in February, some of the numbers were kind of skewed because BGS had a massive single transaction, the largest transaction in the sports card space on eBay in February when they sold a Tom Brady card for $2.1 million, I think it was. So that definitely was a little misleading with the stats, but it kept BGS propped up for a couple of different categories. But again, I think SGC over the next few months shows us that they are the clear number 2 and the marketplace is accepting them as the number 2. Okay, now for PSA, a couple things to take away from PSA stats. It definitely wasn't all roses for PSA. So PSA over the last 60 days dropped 0.5% in market share in total sales. So they gave up 0.5% to the rest of the grading companies with the overall sales amount, sales revenue for graded cards. They also lost a little over 1% in the total transaction category. So they gave up another 1% in total transactions over the last 60 days. So just think of it this way, 1% more of the overall number of sold cards were with other graders outside of PSA. They had 30,000 more unsold cards sitting out there in the ether on eBay over the last 60 days. They had 6,000 less sellers from January to March. So I don't really know how to read that one. I kind of feel like maybe what we're seeing is certain guys that were maybe grading exclusively with PSA have started to shift over to other grading companies. Maybe so. But they had 6,000 less sellers, which is definitely an interesting stat. And they had the second lowest average sell price in the last 2 years for PSA. So that to me is pretty self-explanatory. I think what we've seen is a lot of the junk wax, a lot of the base cards come back from PSA. and everyone's just flooding the market with them, and it's driving down the average sale price. So take it for what it's worth, right? PSA's the leader by a wide margin, right? They're at 70% in total market share in transactions and in revenue. But you're starting to see that decline in different categories that's being eaten away from the likes of SGC and even CSG coming in and taking some of that market share in little ways. So SGC, BGS battling it out for number 2. CSG overtaking HGA for number 4. And PSA seeing a little bit of attrition in certain categories. Was quite the 60 days. Really interested to see what happens over the next 60 to 90 days as we head into the summer months. I will update you with more data then. Thanks so much for watching. Tell me what you think below. See ya.